Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, Arturo O'Farrill, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Juan?
Well, on Capitol Hill, New Jersey Democratic Senator Robert Menendez is holding up the nomination of two of President Obama's key science nominees in an attempt to pressure his fellow senators to oppose legislation that would loosen restrictions on travel to Cuba. Last week, the House approved a $410 billion spending bill that included language to ease some restrictions on trade with Cuba and to allow Cuban-Americans to visit relatives on the island more frequently. The Senate is expected to vote on the spending bill this week. But in an attempt to remove the provisions, Menendez is blocking the confirmation of physicist John Holdren and marine biologist Jane Lubchenco from top science posts. The move has infuriated environmentalists because they say both nominees are needed to help shape President Obama's plan to tackle global warming.
The controversy comes as many in Washington reconsider U.S. policy toward Cuba. Last month, Republican Senator Richard Lugar said the existing U.S. policy has failed. Earlier this week, over 1,000 artists, educators, cultural scholars sent President Obama a letter calling for Cuban artists to be permitted entry into the United States and for the elimination of restrictions that prevent Americans from traveling to Cuba. The letter was sent by the U.S.-Cuba Cultural Exchange. One of the co-signees of the letter was the Grammy Award-winning musician Arturo O'Farrill, the leader of the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. He joins us here in our Firehouse studio. We're also joined by Ambassador Vicki Huddleston in Washington. She served as head of the U.S. Interest Section in Havana from 1999 to 2002. She's now a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's in Washington, D.C. And Michael Renner stayed with us, president of the Center for Constitutional Rights, all here in the Firehouse studio. Arturo O'Farrill, first of all, congratulations on your Grammy.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. I'm very happy about that.
With a name like O'Farrill, people might be surprised to know you're Cuban-American.
Well, it's an amazing coincidence. There's lots of Cubans and I mean lots of Irish people in Cuba. In fact, there's an O'Reilly Street and a hotel named the Palacio O'Farrill. So I think we have a history with Cuba.
Tell us about this letter that you have signed.
Well, the letter is very important because it states that we need to have all cultural restrictions and hopefully economic restrictions lifted from our relationship with Cuba. We act in like Cuba is some sort of nuclear biological threat, and really it's insane. It's completely insane because what it is, it's a place from which we draw sustenance. The history of our music, the history of our culture, our food, our dance is richly infused with the flavor of Cuba. And for us to be denied access to this source of cultural sustenance is absolutely insane. And furthermore, to have to install economic hardship on these people who are so poverty-stricken is positively criminal. It has nothing to do with ideology or politics. It has nothing to do with socialism or communism or capitalism or whatever ism you would like to believe in. It has to do with the fact that we are holding on to an ancient battle that makes no sense, and we're preventing ourselves from accessing great artists and from sending our top artists into Cuba. It's absolutely insane. And so I was happy to sign the letter, to be a part of this, to be able to come here this morning and speak on behalf of our Cuban friends.
And the impact on families, on Cuban-American families, and this, because it seems that depending on which administration there is in Washington, there is more or less access by families to travel back and forth to see mothers, grandparents, children on a more regular basis.
Well, I mean, all I can think about is my mom, who I keep in touch with every day. I talk to her every day. I see her once or twice a week, and she's a major part of my life, warts and all. We all have mothers. I mean, we need them in our lives. We all have sons, daughters, wives, cousins, brothers. And the emotional impact, and I see it on my friends because I have many, many Cuban expatriate friends, and I see the impact on their lives and the huge gap in their understanding of existence that occurs because they don't have access to those whom they love. That's insane. And to limit it to this license or that license or this particular, it just is crazy. The unrestricted travel by Cuban family members, that's 101. That we should just have that right away.
I want to turn for a moment to comments that Senator Obama made before he was president about Cuba. It was last May he was running for president.
There are no better ambassadors for the freedom of the Cuban people than Cuban-Americans. And that's why I have said that I will immediately allow unlimited family travel and remittances to the island. It's time to let Cuban-Americans see their mothers and their fathers, their sisters and their brothers. It's time to let Cuban-American money make their families less dependent on the Castro regime. That is a commitment that I'm making right here. I will maintain the embargo. It provides us with leverage to present. So don't be confused about this. I will maintain the embargo. It provides us with the leverage to present the regime with a clear choice. If you take significant steps towards democracy, beginning with the freeing of all political prisoners, we will take steps to begin normalizing relations. That's the way to bring about real change in Cuba, through strong, smart, principled diplomacy.
That was Senator Barack Obama last May. He was speaking before the Cuban-American National Foundation. Arturo Farrell, your response.
It's interesting because I think the last comment I made had to do with political ideologies and how we're fighting a battle that is seemingly lost on every continent. We do business with North Vietnam. We do business with China. I mean, it's insane to hold on to an economic embargo that has absolutely nothing to do with anything substantial. I respect Obama. I'm very proud of the fact that he's our president, and he has a lot of issues on his table. They're huge, they're demanding, and they represent the threat. I mean, the real safety and sustenance of our economy and the physical well-being of our people. So, yeah, this may not be on the top of his agenda, but I think that the economic embargo is something that needs to eventually be really considered as something that is old, dusty, and needs to be put to pasture.
We're also joined by Ambassador Vicki Huddleston, who served as head of the U.S. Interest Section in Havana from 1999 to 2002. Your perspective, now you've come out as well for a change in U.S. policy. Your perspective on how this battle has continued within the U.S. government and American society over our relationship with Cuba.
Well, I think President Obama said it very well, that he is going to allow travel of Cuban-Americans and remittances from Cuban-Americans. At the same time, President Obama could go further should he wish, because it's within the executive authority of the president to reinstate the regulations on travel that were in existence during the Clinton administration, and in fact during the first part of the Bush administration. So he could go back to people-to-people travel for purposes of culture, humanitarian, education, and that would be a great way to begin. And then I noticed that Amy was talking about Cubans coming up to the United States, Arturo too, and that's fairly easy to do as well. There's no reason, really, that Cubans, artists, authors, movie makers, can't come to the United States. And there shouldn't also be any barrier to American artists working with Cuban artists, because the Berman Amendment allowed this to take place, but then it was interpreted very narrowly, saying that Americans couldn't create new works with Cubans in Cuba. So as the Brookings report says, within the president's executive authority, there's a lot that can be done. Travel to Cuba can be freed up. Travel from Cuba can be freed up, and a lot more interaction can take place between artists, between cultural institutions, and between families, of course.
Ambassador Huddleston, isn't this a big change for you? I mean, you started under Clinton at the Cuba Interest Section. Under George W. Bush, the embargo is strong as ever, and now you're calling for a loosening of the restrictions.
Well, I learned a lot while I was in Cuba. First of all, I was sent there by Clinton.